Pacifica Radio, I'm Christina Onnested. Ukraine has agreed to a 30-day ceasefire after meeting with U.S. officials in Saudi Arabia. Secretary of State Marco Rubio led the high-level delegation.
What we want to see, like any country in the world, Ukraine wants their long-term security. They want to make sure that this doesn't happen again. We all do. What is the point of spending all this time to get a ceasefire, hopefully, and then a negotiated end of the war, only to see it re-spark up again in about 6 years, 4 years, 3 years? We're not interested in that, and they certainly aren't either. So I think the question really is more about a deterrence. But again, I don't think there isn't a peace to secure until you have a peace.
In Paris, European Army chiefs and other military officials from more than 30 countries met for talks on an international force for Ukraine after a ceasefire to help serve as a deterrent. It's the first step in French and British efforts to rally nations under a so-called coalition of the willing to safeguard Ukraine in the event of a ceasefire. Meanwhile, U.S. State Department says it's lifting its pause on intelligence sharing and military aid to Ukraine. It has already begun flowing. Secretary of State Rubio says he'll now take the plan to the Russian Federation and that it would be highly unfortunate if Russia rejects the proposal. The House of Representatives narrowly passed a Republican government funding bill, avoiding a Friday partial shutdown and funding the government to the rest of the fiscal year. One Republican broke ranks and voted against the measure, Thomas Massie of Kentucky. One Democrat also broke their party ranks and voted for it, Jared Diamond of Maine. It now heads to the U.S. Senate, where it will need some Democratic support to avoid a filibuster. Christopher Martinez has more.
Republican Mark Alford of Missouri spoke on the House floor Tuesday.
House Republicans are here to govern. We are passing a continuing resolution to keep America open for business, freeze wasteful spending, and secure our border. This continuing resolution gives President Trump the time and power to continue draining the swamp and undoing the damage the radical left did to our country.
The measure would cut $13 billion in non-defense spending and boost the Pentagon budget by $6 billion. After the vote, Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson blasted Democrats for not supporting the bill.
We did our job today, and it's shameful that they will stop at nothing to shut down the government in a desperate attempt to stop the America First agenda.
It's that Republican agenda that drove Democrats' opposition to the measure. Pete Aguilar of California is chair of the House Democratic Caucus.
Does nothing to lower the costs or living expenses for everyday Americans. Instead, it gives House Republicans permission to enact their plan to cut Medicaid, to give tax cuts to billionaires. We're not going to sign a blank check to the chaos and corruption coming out of the White House.
Reporting for Pacifica Radio News, I'm Christopher Martinez.
The Education Department is laying off more than 1,300 employees, including staff at the agency's student aid and civil rights offices, slashing the department's workforce by half of its previous 4,100 after layoffs and early retirements. The cuts are part of President Trump's pledge to dismantle the agency and put the issue of education back to states. Lee Saunders, president of AFSCME, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, said the firings threaten education for children and those seeking higher education, calling it a page out of the Project 2025 right-wing conservative government overhaul playbook to, quote, make it easier for billionaires and anti-union extremists to give themselves massive tax breaks at the expense of working people. We will not sit by while billionaires like Elon Musk and Linda McMahon, Education Secretary, tear apart public services piece by piece. The Agriculture Department's canceling $1 billion in food purchases for schools and food banks. The USDA has axed 2 programs that let schools, child care centers, and food banks buy food from nearby farms. The Trump administration is starting another round of job cuts. This time, more than 1,000 workers at the nation's Weather, Ocean, and Fisheries Agency, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA. It's begun plans to lay off 10% of its current workforce. President Trump has officially increased tariffs on all steel and aluminum imports to 25%. That went in effect today, escalating a global trade war. He has separate tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and China, with plans to also tax imports from the European Union, Brazil, and South Korea by charging reciprocal rates starting April 2nd. Canada says it will announce $20.7 billion in retaliatory tariffs in response. The European Union today announced retaliatory trade action with new duties on U.S. industrial and farm products from Republican-led states. Nationwide protests against the arrest and detention of a Palestinian activist who organized protests to the war in Gaza last year on Columbia University's campus, Mahmoud Khalil. It was a day of action to protest the detention of Khalil and the Trump administration's crackdown on free speech. Protests took place at major U.S. cities and college campuses. I'm Christina Onnested reporting for Pacifica Radio.